If that's a bullet that was pulled out of his shoulder, then someone loaded a live round into the gun I was holding.
Alec Baldwin is preparing to go on trial to defend himself against a manslaughter charge in the death of cinematographer Halyna Hutchins. So what does it take to represent an A-list celebrity at trial? Johnny Depp's lawyer is here with the scoop and his thoughts on what Alec Baldwin should be doing at trial. Should he testify? Thanks for joining me for Crime Fix. I'm Angenette Levy. Alec Baldwin is one of Hollywood's elite. He's been in show business for more than 40 years now. You've seen him in movies, and you've seen him on TV in your living room. He can do comedy and drama. Some people love him, and others not so much. That's pretty normal. He's had some encounters over the years with paparazzi, and there were those terrible voicemails that became public that he left for his then 11-year-old daughter, Alec Baldwin, years ago.
Hey, I want to tell you something, okay? And I want to leave a message for you right now.
I should note that Alec Baldwin later roasted her dad about that on Comedy Central, so there were no hard feelings. But Alec Baldwin isn't on trial for any of those things. He faces an involuntary manslaughter charge for the shooting death of his cinematographer, Halyna Hutchins, on the set of Rust back in October of 2021. It's an absolute tragedy. Alec Baldwin will be a criminal defendant sitting in a courtroom listening to evidence being presented against him. Baldwin maintains he's not criminally responsible for Hutchins' death, even though he was holding the gun that fired and killed Hutchins. Baldwin maintains he didn't fire the gun. He talked to detectives with the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office shortly after the shooting, and he described what happened, making several statements.
Well, what's interesting, not to digress on some commentary here, is that we've done this for 2 weeks, and we did it the right way every day. Every day. You're on a set, you rehearse, they bring you what's called a cold gun. The gun is either completely empty, the chambers, or there is a cosmetic piece. So, for example, if you're the camera, and this is going to sound silly and specific, but if I'm pointing a gun close to the camera, you want to see into the cylinder that there's material in there, cosmetic material. So those rounds are cosmetic rounds. They put them in.
Baldwin said everything had been fine all week long. He described the scene he was practicing.
But this is all I know, and that is that I take the gun out in the rehearsal. He wants it very dramatic and very slick. I'm trying to sneak up on them. I take the gun out. And as it clears, as the barrel clears, I'll turn and cock the gun over here. I turn and cock the gun goes off. It's supposed to be a cold gun. Nothing. No flash charges, nothing.
And Baldwin described the armorer, Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, clearing the gun, ensuring that it was safe, and then what happened when the gun fired.
Every time we've done this, I'm here to tell you, to testify that every time we've done this, she's done it right. She cleaned the barrel. Okay, so nothing was lodged in there. We went hot when they were ready. You always announce, going hot. Crew gets ready. And then all of a sudden, you're the camera, and I shoot away from you. I sit there like, bang, 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 and flashes are coming out. We shoot the rounds. She cleans the barrel every time, and she checks that the rounds are all cosmetic rounds, or nothing in the chamber for the rehearsal. She hands me the gun. I'm assuming she's done it the right way. She's done it the last 2 weeks. I put it in the holster. I pull it out slow for rehearsing. I'm not filming anything. I pull it out slow, turn, cock the pistol, bang, it goes off, and she hits the ground.
Baldwin made another statement describing the rehearsal and pulling the gun from the holster and cocking the gun. Hutchins and director Joel Souza were setting up the shot for the scene.
There's nobody in my line. Nobody. And so when I shoot the gun, so in the rehearsal, I'm assuming I have an empty gun, and the gun goes off, she's right in front of me. She's as far from me as I am from a difference between maybe you and the door.
Okay. So pretty close proximity.
It was a very tight shot. Okay. The shot was here, of me, not of me. It's of me pulling the gun slowly, turn cock.
Okay.
And she's right there, vulnerable, in a position she wouldn't ordinarily be if we were shooting, and this thing, boom, she hits the ground.
Now, this conversation with sheriff's detectives occurred after the shooting, as director Joel Souza and Halyna Hutchins were being treated at the hospital. In going through Baldwin's police interview, he made one statement that was particularly curious to me.
But that's a bullet.
Yeah, so that's what comes out of...
Well, I think the question, I mean, I don't want to tell you your job, but I'm so sick about this, so sickened by this, that a bullet passed through this girl's body. body. She's in critical condition in a hospital right now, and I fired the gun. 'Cause I think the question, I mean, I don't want to tell you your job, but I'm so sick about this, so sickened by this, that a bullet passed through this girl's body. She's in critical condition in a hospital right now, and I fired the gun. And And if you don't think I feel really, really shitty about that, I do. But the question becomes, to ask Hannah, did you commingle live bullets? What they call live rounds. When they say live round, that's a bullet that a police officer would shoot. Where did that come from in her kid?
Did you catch that? Baldwin stated she, meaning Halyna, is in critical condition at the hospital right now, and I fired the gun. Baldwin said he fired the gun. Later in the interview, he said the gun went off. A couple of months later, in an interview with ABC News anchor George Stephanopoulos, Baldwin denied firing the gun.
It wasn't in the script for the trigger to be pulled.
Well, the trigger wasn't pulled. I didn't pull the trigger.
So you never pulled the trigger?
No. I would never point a gun at anyone and pull a trigger at them, never.
Alec Baldwin may have to explain that discrepancy, or maybe he won't have to. I'll get to more on that later in the show with Ben Chu. Throughout Alec Baldwin's interview with the sheriff's detectives, he displayed some knowledge of guns from working on sets with guns in the past.
I know you said you don't own a gun, but are you experienced with shooting guns?
Only as much as actors have to be experienced.
Okay, which is normally not really.
I mean, like, if you do a movie, safety with weapons is primary. You go off with people. You go off with armaments people to ranges. I've gone to ranges in Arizona where we shot a lot of guns in a movie many years ago, and you go to a range and you shoot for a few hours, and they teach you how to shoot shotguns, Walther, different, little small guns, James Bond guns, big guns, Uzis, machine guns. Whatever you're using, they make you go and rehearse for hours.
Alec Baldwin also told the detectives who handed him the Colt .45 revolver that day.
Right before this incident, Hannah handed you the gun and said, Colt. It wasn't Dave.
I don't mean Colt. No, Hannah handed me the gun.
Okay, it wasn't anybody else but Hannah.
No, Hannah handed me the gun.
And she specifically said?
I believe she said Colt.
Alec Baldwin was emphatic that armorer Hannah Gutierrez Reed handed the gun to him.
She comes in, she hands me the gun all the time.
And then what?
If there's any shooting involved in the scene, she always hands me the gun.
Never has Dave handed you the gun?
Never.
Okay.
But in the ABC interview, Baldwin made it sound as if Dave Halls handed him the gun.
I'm handed a gun, and someone declares, they said, this is a cold gun.
Dave Halls?
The first AD.
Alec Baldwin also ruled out the possibility that someone deliberately put a live round in that revolver.
They've been very safety conscious here throughout. That's what puzzles me.
Well,
we didn't have anything.
And I guess that's more like the question that I'm trying to get at is, do you think someone would deliberately do this?
I can't imagine who would.
Okay.
Before Baldwin ever started talking with sheriff's detectives, the interview room camera recorded him talking with his wife and someone else.
No, what I am is someone who, I don't want to do this for a living anymore. I don't want to be a public person. And, I'm the one holding the gun in my hand that everybody was supposed to have taken care of. They always hand me a cold gun. Where are you now?
Hey, everybody. I want to take a second to tell you about a great app that I've tried that will give you cash back on things like gas and food. It's called Upside. It's not a confusing rewards or point system. Upside gives you real money back that can go straight into your bank account or onto a gift card. When I pump gas or order takeout, I always check Upside for the best deals. Why not get cash back when you fill up your tank or order food? Here's how it works. Download Upside and look at the offers. When you find one, claim it and then pay with your debit or credit card. I've used Upside to get cash back on gas and pizza. I got almost $9 back total on both, and you cannot beat that. Upside works at many popular gas stations and restaurants, including 7-Eleven and Chipotle. To find out how much you could earn, click the link in the description or scan the QR code on your screen and use the promo code CRIMEFIX to get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. That's promo code CRIMEFIX for an extra 25 cents back on your first tank of gas. I want to bring in somebody who is no stranger to representing an A-list celebrity. He is Ben Chu. He represented actor Johnny Depp in his defamation trial against his ex-wife, Amber Heard. So, Ben, first of all, thanks for coming on. What are the challenges of representing an A-list celebrity who really, lives in a different world from the rest of us? They really do have a different lifestyle than most normal people.
Angenette, first, it's great to be with you. Thank you for having me on. It is different representing someone of Alec Baldwin's stature. They do live in a different world. They tend to be very concerned about their public image. So I can understand why, he felt compelled not only to speak with the police, but also to go on national television and give an interview with George Stephanopoulos. I mean, first of all, that's not something an average person can do. And secondly, the average person is less concerned with his or her public image than a prominent actor, entertainer, or politician might be.
He said something really interesting. I don't know if he realized he was being recorded during his interview with the sheriff's detectives, but they hadn't come in yet. And he said to someone he was talking on the phone with, I believe it was either his wife or someone he was close to. And he said, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to be a public person anymore. And I thought that was really interesting because he has been in the public eye for more than 40 years now. He's an A-list celebrity, and maybe it just gets to be too much sometimes, the glare and the scrutiny. And this brought him under tremendous scrutiny.
Angenette, that's a really interesting comment. I hadn't heard that he'd made that statement. It doesn't surprise me. I've represented a few very prominent people in Hollywood, and they deal with it differently. A number of them deal with it. They go into semi-seclusion at times, and a lot of them have been taken advantage of by people they thought were their friends. So they tend to have kind of a very close-knit group of people around them. They're security people, very, very close friends. So they often live in a bit of a cocoon. I think that probably I think they live in a bubble. Yeah, that's a better word. And I think that becomes tiresome with them. I remember at one point during the Depp v. Heard trial, Johnny just wanted to go out and take a walk at night. It was a rare balmy night in Fairfax in May, and he wanted to go out and take a walk. And whereas you or I could go out and do that without having to make arrangements, he had to get his security ready. They had to map out the route. It's just things that you and I take for granted, they can't do. And I can see him getting very frustrated. And this would be a traumatic event for anybody, whether you're Alec Baldwin or somebody on the street. But I think it had to be exacerbated by the fact that as a public figure, this was going to draw an enormous amount of extra scrutiny, and perhaps an ordinary person would never have even been charged under these circumstances.
Well, Alec Baldwin is somebody who, can ruffle some feathers. I mean, he's had brushes with the paparazzi in the past. He can be a bit of a kind of a bruiser of sorts. He's from Long Island. He's actually very eloquent when you listen to him speak. In public or even in this police interview that he did with the sheriff's detectives. So he is well-spoken. You can tell he's well-read. But at the same time, he can get kind of rough and tumble when he has to. The courtroom is a much different place, though, than walking around in Manhattan or in Long Island or wherever you're living. So what if you're advising him, if you're representing Alec Baldwin, how do you advise him when he shows up to court every day to kind of present himself? Because this isn't going to be like the Johnny Depp trial where you show up and there are going to be alpacas running around and stuff like that. This is a trial. This is a trial where a woman lost her life. There is a much different vibe. So how do you advise Alec Baldwin to present himself when he appears in court? Because he hasn't shown up for any of the pretrial hearings.
That's a great question, Angenette. I would advise him first and foremost, as you would your clients, to assume that at any given moment in the courtroom, there is at least one juror looking at him. In other words, no matter who is testifying, whether the judge is speaking, no matter what's happening, there will be at least one juror and perhaps several jurors looking at him. So his demeanor, even when not speaking, is absolutely crucial. You're right. This is not going to be like the Depp v. Heard trial. There are not going to be any moments of levity at all. So this is not going to be appropriate for him to be smiling, to be joking around with his attorney, mugging for the cameras. He's going to have a dead serious demeanor and just assume that he is essentially the focus of everybody's attention every second he's in the courtroom, and he's going to have to behave accordingly. If that means he has to look down, that's fine. But he can't inject any levity. As you said, a young woman is dead here, and it's a tragedy. So that would be thing one. And I think, to the extent, and we'll probably get to this a little later, there's going to be a momentous decision as to whether he testifies. I think he could be a very compelling witness for the reasons you say. He's telegenic. He is articulate, he is intelligent. That can be a double-edged sword, but I think if he really is dedicated to prep, I think he could make for a very compelling witness in his own defense.
Well, now that you've gone there, let's talk about that. Because there is a question about, I remember back when Johnny Depp was on the stand at trial, and a lot of people I know who work in the news business, or even my family members, a lot of people were like, well, he's an actor. Of course he can get up there and he can act and he can do this or he can do that. I mean, they don't know Johnny Depp from Adam, right? I mean, none of us do. We know what we see in interviews, or have seen in interviews in the past, or what we've seen in maybe his films and things of that nature. But is there a concern that when you put a client on the stand that is an actor, that they act, and that maybe they're not just being themselves?
Yes, that is a real concern. In Johnny's case, we weren't, because that was him. He wasn't acting. That was the real him. And we knew that this was very important for him. There had been a prior trial in London where he really didn't have the opportunity to testify and to tell his story. The way that system works, as you know, there's no direct examination. You're just subject to cross-examination where you're saying yes or no. So he was committed, win or lose, to telling his story in his own voice. So in that case, he wasn't acting. He was telling the truth. I won't say anything about the other side in that, one way or the other, but it is a concern generally. And I would advise Mr. Baldwin, if I could be so presumptuous, to really be authentic. And if he does testify, to show his emotions, because I recall shortly thereafter, he really appeared genuinely devastated, not only because he was in hot water, but I think he legitimately cared about Halyna Hutchins, and why wouldn't he? I mean, they got to know each other very well. You can't manufacture these things, but I think it would be very helpful for him to cry. If that's, this is not the time for him to be the tough guy with several brothers, from the hood. This is the time for him to show all of his emotions, not to make it about him, but to show grief, not for himself, but for her. That's not admitting that he's guilty of a crime. That's just being human. And I would think that was crucial to the defense, if he testifies, that the jurors see how much this kills him inside.
We have him on video on a police interview talking about what happened that day. And he talks about kind of shooting the gun. And then he talks to George Stephanopoulos in an interview with ABC News months later saying, I didn't pull the trigger, that wasn't in the script. It wasn't going to go off or whatever. So we have kind of some statements here that the jury could see as conflicting. So do you think that he has to testify? I mean, no defendant in criminal court, in the criminal courts in our country, has to testify. I mean, he has the right to not testify and take the stand. But is this something you would advise, that maybe he does testify to explain what he believes happened and what was going on that set? Because not only is he facing criminal liability, but civil liability as well.
I think he has to testify. I think the original sin, and I don't mean a sin in the literal sense, but I think his mistake was giving a prior statement, certainly giving conflicting statements to the police and on national TV to George Stephanopoulos was an enormous mistake because, as you said, now you have contradictory statements. I pulled the trigger. I didn't pull the trigger. I think he needs to explain that, explain what his recollection of the truth was. And as we talked about off camera, there is another possibility, which is that he may subjectively believe that he did not pull the trigger or do anything affirmatively to cause the bullet to hit her and the other gentleman, but that he just doesn't remember it. I mean, this happened in a split second. I mean, he's very clear on the fact that he thought the gun was not loaded. I don't think there's any reason to believe that he thought the gun was loaded or that he had any intent to, put her in that kind of danger. But I think it's a plausible scenario, and I've seen it in a civil case I handled, where the person just subjectively cannot believe that he did this because that would just exacerbate his own guilt. So I think it's quite possible that he simply doesn't remember. And unfortunately, he's made his life, if that's the truth, then he's made his life more complicated by coming out so clearly and saying, I did not pull the trigger. Because now there are going to be some jurors, especially if he doesn't testify, who think he was lying about that. Because as I understand the forensic evidence, does not support at least one version of his account. I think he's going to have to explain all of it. And I think the more accepting of fault and the possibility that he didn't remember everything, I think the more sympathetic the jury is going to be for him.
He repeatedly says in his police interview, he explains how they rehearse and being given a cold gun and what that means and what the armor did each day that, week and things of that nature. So it's interesting to listen to him recount all of this during the police interview. And he was concerned that he was going to be.
I didn't mean to interrupt Angenette. I just think that's terrible for him. The more that he says that he knows what he's doing, that he has been trained, and you never point a loaded gun at a person. And he also, as I remember from that interview, he's talking about the wadding that can be in a gun. He didn't think that even after the accident that there had been a bullet fired, that he thought that it might be a wadding that kept the gunpowder together. And when the wadding is expelled, that can cause injury. And so she thought that actually she may have had a heart attack or suffered, an injury from the wadding. All of that, I think, is really bad for him because
he knows a lot about guns. Yes,
he knows all about guns, and so now his attorney can't say, "Look, he's an actor. He's just an actor. You had an armorer. She was supposed to be the expert. Then there was another employee on the set. I mean, there are at least two people on the set who were supposed to be responsible for the gun to make sure it was safe, to make sure that it wasn't actually loaded. But it's harder for him now to make that argument because he's like, I know you don't point a gun at a person. I know you don't pull the trigger. That's where, we talked about earlier about his intelligence being a double-edged sword. He doesn't want people to think that he's an idiot or that he was careless. But in doing that as a public persona, protecting his image, I think he's really made his defense a lot more complicated.
When he shows up for court, do you expect people to be there? You might have some looky-loos there hanging out, but do you expect him to put on a PR offensive at this trial? I mean, as we mentioned, this is not a civil case. This is not the Depp v. Heard trial. Do you expect him to have maybe supporters hanging out there, things of that nature? Or do you think this will be a little more toned down? And it's out in Santa Fe, New Mexico. It's not easy to get there.
Yeah, I would hope not. I would hope that his people would definitely not encourage that and actively discourage that. I think there will be people who are curious. He has a lot of fans. He's a terrific actor. He's a great comedic actor, famous family. So I think there's going to be a lot of media attention. You're going to be there. I mean, it's a big deal, but I really hope for his sake, and really for everyone's sake, for the victim's family, that there isn't a circus-like atmosphere. I don't think there will be. I think people will understand that there's nothing happy about this. There's nothing, this isn't about, Mr. Depp's case, it was about his vindication. There's going to be no vindication for Alec Baldwin. I mean, the best case scenario is, for him, is that there's no criminal liability, but he's not going to come out of this a hero. People are going to say, well, he made a mistake, but he shouldn't suffer for it criminally. There's no good outcome. I mean, a young woman is dead, as you said at the beginning. I think that's where you start and that's where you end. So I hope everybody treats it with the solemnity that it deserves.
Most certainly. And it doesn't matter if you believe, after seeing the evidence, that he is not guilty or guilty. This is a tragedy. And it's a tragedy on many sides. It's the biggest tragedy for Halyna Hutchins' family. It's terrible. She was a mother and a wife and a sister and a daughter. And it's tragic. And in the words of Dave Halls, the first AD, it should never, ever happen again. Ben Chu, thank you so much for coming on. And that's it for this episode of Crime Fix. I'm Angenette Levy. Thanks so much for being with me. I'll see you back here next time.